Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala khatimil anbiya wal mursaleen Nabiina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa tabi'ina lahum bi ihsan ila yawmiddin. Okay, in the last two sessions we spoke about the evidence of the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Secondly, the Shaykh moves on to the beautiful names of Allah and His attributes. Firstly, the definition. They are names which Allah the Most High has affirmed for Himself and which His slave and messenger Muhammad ﷺ has affirmed for him, and all of the Muslims believe in them. Okay, the second issue is their number, and the answer to that is no one knows them except Allah. And this is derived from the hadith wherein we say, for whoever is in a state of grief and needs relief from that grief, he says, I ask you by every name that you have, which you have named yourself with, or you have sent it down in your book, or you have taught it to one of your creation, or you have kept it to yourself in the unseen. So from this hadith we see that not necessarily those names which have been revealed through revelation consist of all of the names, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has withheld some of them with Himself. And others He may have informed the angels, and we were not informed, and we were only informed of a limited number. So the third issue the Shaykh discusses is the virtue of whoever learns 99 of them. And the answer of which is that whoever enumerates 99 of them will enter Jannah, from the evidence that indeed for Allah is 99 names, and whoever enumerates them will enter Jannah, and He is witr, the odd, and He loves the witr. And there are a few hadith related which are found circulated among the Muslims. However, they are weak hadith and are not they're not authentic. However, it is said that they are the ijtihad of various scholars, and Allah knows best. The fourth issue with regard to the names of Allah and His attributes is the meaning of belief in them, and it is iman in what Allah the Most High has described Himself with and what His messenger has described Him with from His beautiful names and lofty attributes. And then there's Shaykh goes on to point out some warnings. He gives us some warnings. First of all is that the names of Allah are tawqifiyya, meaning we don't add anything to them. Okay? And he points out that not every action is to be attributed with a name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the example that he's given here is in the verse وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَذَهَبَ بِسَمْعِهِمْ وَأَبْصَارِهِمْ. Okay, so the verb which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has attributed here to Himself is ذهب. However, the scholars saying that it's not permissible to derive the name ذاهب from this verb, as there are several verbs which are attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala but only during certain circumstances, whereas His names are permanent characteristics of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another example is in the verse وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ. Okay, and they plot and Allah plots, but we don't call Allah, may Allah forgive us, a plotter. Okay, this verb is only associated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the situation where others are plotting against Allah and His religion. So it's not a permanent attribute, whereas the verb al-alim, for example, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-knowing, okay, is a permanent attribute. This attribute never leaves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at any time. That attribute is always with Him. He is always seeing. There is not a moment that Allah doesn't see. Okay, so this is the difference between the names and attributes. Okay, not all attributes, not all verbs are attributed in the form of names. Okay, the fifth issue is the indications of the beautiful names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the reality of Allah the Most High. Okay, so one, okay, it indicates upon the essence, okay, corresponding. For example, the example the girls wrote in the book here, Jalaal, okay, so this is corresponding, the meaning, the loftiness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corresponds with the name, okay. And then there are, number two, okay, there are attributes, derived attributes, which also comprises of other meanings, which he has said they are four divisions. The first is Ismul Alam, which is Allah, okay. So this name comprises all of the other names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, the second is that which comprises of the characteristics, such as sifa, the description comprises of the essence. For example, hearing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always hearing, okay, so this is an essence. And also the third category, that which the characteristic which comprises of the action. For example, the action of creating, al-Khaliq, okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always constantly creating new creations, and this is the action attributed, contained within that characteristic. And the second is that all of what is contained, these names are comprised of, okay, are to be above, okay, and glorified from every deficiency and irregularity, okay, like the term al-Quddus and Assalaam. Okay, the third issue with regard to the indications, okay, is characteristics or qualities which the name necessitates. For example, Ar-Rahman, okay, it necessitates that anything that has mercy is living, okay, so that was the attribute of living is necessitated with the attribute of Ar-Rahman, as well as Khaliq, As-Sami', and many of the other attributes. Okay, the Shaykh then goes on to mention, gives us some warnings. The first of which is that all of the creation is non-existent, okay, and then he brought it into existence, and that it is endangered to extinction. It will become extinct at one stage. The second point is that he's saying that his names do not necessitate shirk. So some people may say that, oh, if you're calling on Ar-Rahman, that's shirk, that's another being, that Trinity, for example. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Al-Isra, قُلِ ادْعُوا اللَّهَ أَوْ ادْعُوا الرَّحْمَنَ. So you call on Allah or you call on Ar-Rahman. The intention is the same. You're intending Allah, you're intending the Creator, whose name is also Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, including many of his other names. The third point is that none of the creation knew the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until Allah himself informed them. And the evidence for which coming from the verse, and he taught Adam the names of all of them. Okay, so this is an indication that we don't know, that no one has the ability to know anything about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except what he himself has taught and revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his other prophets and angels, who have then in turn taught them to us. The second one is that the loaner is richer than the borrower. So making the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala borrowed from the creation is making Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in need of the man. So whereas it's the opposite. We are in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next point is the meaning of ihsa, okay, the meaning of enumerating the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is giving them all their rights and working according to them. For example, one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Basir, okay, So to give it its rights is to call on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, Ya al-Basir, Ya al-Rahman, to call on Him, to invoke Him by these names, to glorify Him by these names. So these are the rights. And then to work according to that. Okay, so now Allah can see everything. Allah can see what I do alone. Allah can see what I do with other people. Allah sees everything. So now acting according to that, I act in accordance with the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing that He can see everything that I do. So I try to perfect my deeds for His sake. I try to refrain from sinning. I try to seek His pleasure at all times and do things in a manner that would please Him. So this is what's the meaning of ihsaha, enumerating them. So it's to live according to those names, not just to know them, not just to memorize them, not just to repeat them, but to live my life according to the meanings of what those names necessitate. Inshallah, we'll continue with the characteristics of Allah in the next session. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.